Good morning. We look today at 1 Kings chapters 16 through 18. And chapter 16 is a chapter that talks mostly about kings of Israel. King Asa was the king of Judah, living in Jerusalem, and he was the king. He reigned for 41 years, and he was faithful, and he walked with God, it says in the Bible. In chapter 16, it's talking about the different kings of Israel, not King Asa, but the Israelites were split into these two factions at that time, and it's been that way for a little bit. Now, anyway, in chapter 16, we go through this quite a list of kings of Israel that served as king of Israel, and none of them followed God during the 41 years that Asa was king of Judah and living in Jerusalem. And it starts, the chapter 16, the word of the Lord came to Jehu, son of, against Baasha, who was this king at the time. And so then we hear of Baasha's demise, and on so many of them, and someone else comes to take power and completely kills everyone of the house of Baasha and of different things. And we hear many times of how all of the deeds of this king were written in the Chronicles of the Kings or the Book of the Kings and stuff. And it goes on and on and on that way. And there was one point where Omri was king over half and Tibni was king over half. There were warring kings that way in these Israelites that way. And then Tibni dies, so Omri becomes king over all. And these, many of them are identified in history as during this year reign. And in verse 29, it's in the 38th year of King Asa, Ahab, son of Omri, began to reign over Israel. So we're seeing the reigns of these two that are going on at the same time. Asa for a long time, and then quite a few others. I didn't count how many others, but it was quite a few. And they're all, not faithful to God. Excuse me. As we begin chapter 17, we're introduced to a new prophet, Elijah. I think you've heard of him. But this is the first we hear of the prophet Elijah. And it says, now Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, he was the king of Israel. And as I read this, I'm always reminded of the song, there is a balm in Gilead to make the sin sick whole. There's a tongue twister in a way, but so Elijah, is the balm of Gilead, I believe, and he's the one that's coming with a message. But all of a sudden, this prophet shows up. God has spoken to Elijah, and Elijah goes to the king Ahab and says, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither drought, or neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word. And this comes to pass, and Elijah goes, and he has to hide out. He has to live in hiding, and God feeds him. He says, go and hide yourself by the wadi, the water hole, which is east of Jordan, and you will drink from the wadi, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. Think about that. God uses the ravens, a bird that is, it's a carry-on bird. It eats dead animals and stuff, and it isn't the kind of bird that I would want to have feed me. But God uses this despised bird to feed Elijah. And they brought him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening. And there was no water there. And pretty soon this water hole where he was dries up as well. And then the word of the Lord comes, and he says, go down to Zarephath and live there, for I have commanded a widow there to take care of you. And he goes, in another story we're quite familiar with, I think, of, he comes to this widow's house, and she says, I have only enough bread to make one more meal for my son and myself, and we're going to eat it, and then we're going to die. And he says, well, how about you make a loaf for me first? And she does. Think about that. She knows that she's got nothing, and she's, no hope for the future. But yet she she prepares a meal for this stranger that comes. And by doing so, God blesses her with meal and oil enough to live for years. I mean, it's enough that her meal and her oil never run out. And we'll read in in the New Testament of there's a place where it refers to only the widow of Zarephath that was helped by Elijah, and this is one person that listened, and that Elijah raises that woman's son from the dead, in this story as well. And verse 17, the son became ill, and his illness was severe. There was no breath left in him. That's a polite way of saying he died, right? But Elijah goes up and prays over this boy. We don't know how old he is, and then he brings this boy back down to his mother and says he lives by the grace of God. And this woman then realizes, she says, now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is true. Think about that this foreign woman, a woman who doesn't really know about the God of Israel, sees in Elijah God and his power and his goodness. And then after Elijah had been there many days, it says in chapter 18, and that could be a couple years. Who knows what many days means? He says, go present yourself to Ahab, the king. And this king has been looking for Elijah. He's had search parties out, and we're going to see that and it says the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab summoned Obadiah, who was in charge of the palace, to go to Jezebel, because Jezebel was killing off the prophets of the Lord, and Obadiah had hid 100 prophets, and I kind of wonder a little bit here, because then pretty quick then Elijah says, I am the only prophet left, but here it says that Obadiah had hid 100 of them, 50 in each of 2 different caves. And so Obadiah goes and he's looking to going on his way to Jezebel, and Elijah meets him, and he says, is that you, Elijah? Is that you, my Lord Elijah? Do you know that Ahab is looking for you? And Elijah says, yep, it's me. Go tell Ahab I'm here. And Obadiah says, no, I'm not going to go tell him, because if I tell him you're here, you're going to disappear, and then we'll come and you'll be nowhere to be found, and I'll be in trouble. And Elijah says, no, trust me. I will show up. I will come to the king. And he does. And, because Obadiah was afraid of being killed, because, if Elijah wasn't where he told Ahab he was, then he'd be in trouble. And so when I just love this part, when Ahab sees Elijah, he says, is that you troublemaker of Israel? Think about that. Is that you troublemaker of Israel? Who was the real troublemaker? Elijah comes with the word of the Lord. And the troublemakers are the kings who are leading the people away from God, and are creating the false idols, and are telling the people lies, and are twisting the truth. And how much truth do we see twisted in the world today? And we see posts, a lie is a lie, even if all the people believe it, and the truth is the truth, even if no one believes it. Well, this is the way the kings of Israel were. They were setting up these false gods, and they were leading the people away from God. And they were not only telling half-truths, but outright lies. And so they're, in my opinion, they are the real troublemakers for the people of Israel, for all people. A leader who leads people down the wrong path is the worst kind of leader that there can be. A leader who is dishonest and corrupt in his ways is so wrong. And it's kind of like the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood, that story as well. But anyway, quite a greeting that Ahab gives to Elijah. And so then Elijah, in this chapter, challenges the god of Baal. He says, if your god Baal is so great, let's You sacrifice to Baal and I'll sacrifice to God, and we'll see whose God is really God. And again, I'm sure you know the story, but the priests of Baal, slaughter the bull and put it on the altar and pray and shout and cheer. And it says, they cut themselves, and they're doing everything they can to try to get Baal to do something. And, that's just like asking a rock to jump up into the sky. A rock can't do that. I mean, unless you pick it up and throw it, a rock is going to lay there on the ground. And so they pray and they pray and pray, and nothing happens. And evening time, Elijah says, now I'll show you the power of the one God, of the true God. And he takes his bull that has been slaughtered. He rebuilds an altar out of 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel, representing God as the God of the 12 tribes of Israel. And he puts the slaughtered bull on it, and he has them pour water 3 different times on the bricks, or on the stones, and on the bull, and on the wood, and on everything. And there's even a moat kind of around this that holds the water. And Elijah prays, and God causes the fire to come down, and it consumes not only the wood and the bull, but the stones and all of the water that's there as well. And truly, there is a God of Israel. And it's one of the stories of the Old Testament that just remind us of the power of God and of the faithfulness of God. And when we're faithful to God, the blessings that come from him. And it's, and of course Elijah then said, it's going to rain now. And they look, and there's, they can't even see a cloud. But all of a sudden, clouds are there, and the rain comes. And it is as God had said, there would be no rain except at the word of Elijah. So we've been introduced to Elijah, possibly the greatest prophet of the God of Israel.